This woman, her name is Chrissy, walked into a hospital at 34 weeks pregnant, alone, terrified, and about to lose everything she'd ever loved. The baby growing inside her belonged to a man who'd already moved on with someone else. The man she'd lived with for 3 years had married another woman, and the life she'd so carefully constructed, it was crumbling faster than she could catch the pieces. But here's the thing that will absolutely shock you. 6 months earlier, she had it all. 2 men who loved her, a career she was proud of, a life that looked perfect from the outside. And then she made one decision, one single choice at a party, that set off a chain reaction so devastating, it left her sleeping in her childhood bedroom at 27 years old with a newborn baby and no idea how to put her life back together. I'm Emma, and this is Mrs. Emma, where we share the stories that people are too afraid to tell anyone else. And today's story? It's about what happens when you think you've figured out how to have everything, only to discover you've been holding on to nothing at all. So settle in, because Chrissy's story is one that'll make you question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the consequences of our deepest desires. When Chrissy was 23 years old, she met Landon at a mutual friend's birthday party. He was 26 then, kind, stable, the type of man who remembered your coffee order and actually listened when you talked about your day. They fell into a relationship that felt easy, comfortable, like slipping into your favorite pair of shoes. For 2 years, they built something solid together, shared an apartment, split the bills, made plans for a future that included matching coffee mugs and lazy Sunday mornings. But somewhere around year 2, Chrissy started feeling restless. She'd been reading articles online, think pieces about how traditional monogamy was just an outdated social construct, how enlightened people were exploring different relationship structures, how you could love multiple people without it diminishing any of those connections. And the more she read, the more she became convinced that she was limiting herself by staying in just one relationship. She started thinking, why should I confine my heart to one person when I have so much love to give? So one evening, after they'd finished a bottle of wine and were talking about their dreams, Chrissy brought it up. She told Landon about polyamory, about open relationships where trust and honesty mattered more than possession. She explained that she loved him deeply, but that she wanted the freedom to explore connections with other people too. And she promised him, absolutely promised, that this wasn't about him not being enough. It was about her wanting to grow, to experience life fully, to be honest instead of sneaking around like so many people did. Now Landon? He wasn't thrilled. You could see it in his eyes, the confusion, the hurt, the fear of losing her. But Landon was also the kind of man who'd do anything to make the person he loved happy. So after several long conversations, after weeks of Chrissy reassuring him that this would make their relationship stronger, not weaker, he agreed to try it. He said he'd work through his insecurities because he wanted her to be fulfilled. What Landon didn't know, what Chrissy didn't tell him until much later, was that she already had someone in mind. His name was Joel. He was part of their friend group, someone Chrissy had been having increasingly intense conversations with at parties and gatherings. They worked in the same field, so they always had plenty to talk about. But more than that, there was this undeniable chemistry between them, the kind that makes the air feel electric when you're in the same room. Chrissy convinced herself she wasn't planning to cheat. She told herself that by opening up her relationship with Landon first, she was doing the honest, ethical thing. She was being transparent. She was communicating. She was following all the rules she'd read about in those articles. Once Landon agreed to the open relationship, Chrissy and Joel moved quickly, and the connection was everything she'd imagined it would be. Where Landon was steady and predictable, Joel was spontaneous and exciting. He'd text her at midnight wanting to drive around the city with the windows down. He'd show up at her office with coffee and that mischievous grin that made her heart race. With him, everything felt alive, intense, like she was finally experiencing what real passion was supposed to feel like. Meanwhile, Landon tried to date other people too. Chrissy encouraged him, told him he should explore, that he'd find amazing connections just like she had. But the truth was, Landon struggled. He'd go on a date every few months, meet women through work or dating apps, but nothing ever developed into anything serious. Most of the women didn't stick around once they learned about his relationship situation. And Chrissy? She was thriving. She had Landon for stability, comfort, someone to split bills and make breakfast with on Sunday mornings. And she had Joel for excitement, passion, those moments that made her feel truly alive. She convinced herself she'd figured out the secret to happiness. Why choose when you can have both? They established ground rules, of course. Always use protection with other partners. Don't bring relationship drama home. Be transparent about who you're seeing. And for 2 years, Chrissy thought they were making it work beautifully. She'd tell her friends that open relationships just required trust and communication. She'd brag about how evolved she and Landon were, how they'd moved beyond jealousy and possessiveness. There was one incident, about a year in, where Chrissy contracted an STI from a casual partner. She had to tell Landon, watch him process the fact that her choices had directly impacted his health. He was disappointed, hurt even, but he didn't explode. He didn't blame her. He just asked her to be more careful, to make sure everyone got tested regularly. And Chrissy? She felt terrible for about a week, then moved on. She told herself these things happen when you're living authentically. But by year 2, cracks were starting to show. Joel was getting tired of being the secondary relationship. He'd make comments about how they never got to do normal couple things together, how he wanted to meet her parents, how he wished they could be open about their relationship instead of downplaying it around their mutual friends. He was falling in love with her, he said, and he wanted more. Chrissy understood his frustration, but she also knew she couldn't give him what he wanted without disrupting everything she'd built with Landon. She tried to explain that this was the nature of their arrangement, that he'd always be important to her, but that Landon was her primary partner. Then came the party that changed everything. It was at a mutual friend's house, just their usual crowd, drinking, playing games, nothing out of the ordinary. Except Joel had been building up to this night for weeks. He wanted them to be openly affectionate, to stop hiding their connection. And when they got there, he started introducing Chrissy to people as his girlfriend. Not his friend, not his casual partner. His girlfriend. They did shots together, played drinking games. And as the night went on and the alcohol flowed, Joel pulled her upstairs to a quiet balcony where they could actually talk. That's where he told her how he really felt, that he was falling in love with her, that he wanted more than stolen moments and secret dates, that he was tired of competing for her attention. And Chrissy, tipsy and emotional and caught up in the intensity of the moment, told him she was developing serious feelings too, that what they had meant more to her than she'd expected. They kissed on that balcony for what felt like forever. And when they came back downstairs, they were all over each other. The party had gotten more chaotic, more crowded, which was perfect because no one was paying attention to how they were acting. By the time most people had left, it was just them and a handful of others scattered around the house. The music was still playing. The energy between them was impossible to ignore. They ended up on the couch, and things escalated quickly. Joel suggested they go upstairs to one of the bedrooms. And this is where everything went wrong. They got upstairs, lost in the moment, in each other, in all that pent-up emotion and desire. And then they realized neither of them had brought protection. Joel searched the room, checked drawers, came up empty. And they stood there, faced with a choice. Chrissy knew what the responsible thing was. She knew what the rules were. Rules she and Landon had established specifically to prevent situations like this. But she was drunk, emotional, caught up in this fantasy she'd been building with Joel. And Joel said he'd been tested recently, that he was clean. Chrissy told him the same thing. They'd been together for 2 years at that point. They weren't strangers. So they made the choice. They decided the moment was too perfect to ruin with overthinking. And it was amazing, Chrissy remembers. All that tension, all that buildup, everything they'd been dancing around for months, it all exploded into this incredible physical connection. The next morning, she woke up at Joel's apartment feeling hungover but exhilarated, like they'd crossed some threshold into a deeper version of their relationship. A few days later, they hooked up again, and again, no protection. Because they'd already crossed that line, Chrissy reasoned. What difference did it make now? 3 weeks later, Chrissy's period was late. At first, she brushed it off. Her cycle had been irregular lately, stress from work, she told herself. But when another week passed with no sign of it, a nagging feeling started growing in the pit of her stomach. She'd been on birth control for years. She was usually good about taking it. Sure, there had been a few times recently where she'd taken it late, maybe missed a day here and there, but nothing serious. Nothing that should have caused problems. Still, she decided to take a test. Just to rule it out. Just for peace of mind. She bought one of those early detection tests and took it first thing on a Tuesday morning before work, expecting to laugh at herself for being paranoid. 2 lines appeared, clear as day. Positive. Chrissy sat on her bathroom floor for 20 minutes, staring at that test, willing it to change, willing those lines to disappear. But they didn't. She called in sick to work and spent the entire day in bed, trying to process what this meant. She had 2 men in her life. One was her partner, the person she'd built a life with over 3 years. The other was someone she loved, but who'd never talked about being ready for the kind of commitment that comes with raising a child. And now she had to tell them both. She told Landon first, waited until Thursday evening after dinner when they were both settled in for the night. Then she just came out with it. I'm pregnant, and there's a chance the baby isn't yours, because of what happened with Joel at that party. Landon got very, very quiet. Chrissy had expected anger, accusations, hurt. Instead, he just asked what she wanted to do about it. When she said she wasn't sure yet, he told her he'd support whatever she decided. But he needed to know if she was keeping the baby before he could figure out his own feelings. The conversation with Joel was worse. He panicked immediately. Started talking about how he wasn't ready to be a father, how this wasn't what he'd signed up for. Then he asked if she was sure the baby was his. And when she explained that she couldn't be certain, his reaction was this strange mix of relief and anxiety. Chrissy scheduled an amniocentesis, a procedure where they insert a long needle through your abdomen into the amniotic sac to extract fluid for testing. The procedure was terrifying. The wait for results was torture. When the call finally came, Chrissy was at work. She sat in her car in the parking lot afterward, staring at her phone, trying to process the words the doctor had just said. The baby was Joel's. When she told Joel, his reaction surprised her completely. Instead of panicking again, he asked to meet up and talk. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking over the past 2 weeks. When they met that evening, Joel told her something she never expected to hear. He wanted to be a father. If she was willing to keep the baby, he wanted to try to make a real relationship work between them. But, and this was the big condition, he couldn't handle co-parenting with her while she was still living with Landon. He wanted her to choose. Either commit to building a life with him and the baby, or follow through on terminating the pregnancy. That night, Chrissy had the hardest conversation of her life with Landon. She told him about Joel's ultimatum, about the impossible choice she was facing. She expected him to fight for her, to tell her they could make it work somehow. Instead, Landon nodded slowly and said he'd figured this might happen eventually. He told her he'd always known what she had with Joel was different, more intense, more passionate. He said he could see how she lit up when she talked about Joel. And while it hurt him to admit it, he could also see that Joel was offering her something he couldn't. The chance to build something completely new and exciting. Then Landon said something that absolutely shattered her. He told her he thought she should go with Joel. Not because he didn't love her. Not because he didn't want to be with her. But because he could see that's where her heart was really pulling her. He said he'd rather let her go pursue what might be the love of her life than keep her in a relationship where she'd always wonder what she'd given up. So Chrissy made her decision. She told Joel she wanted to keep the baby and try to build a real relationship with him. She told Landon she was moving out, and she started completely restructuring her life around this new reality. For 3 weeks, everything felt perfect. Like she'd finally made the right choice. Chrissy and Joel found an apartment together, started talking about baby names and how to decorate the nursery, made plans for their future as a family. She felt like she was finally living authentically, finally following her heart without compromise. But then Joel started changing. Little things at first, less affectionate, more critical, less excited about the pregnancy. When she asked what was wrong, he blamed stress from work, exhaustion from helping her move. The breaking point came when Joel admitted the truth. He was having second thoughts about everything. He said the reality of becoming a father was scarier than he'd anticipated. But worse than that, watching Chrissy end her relationship with Landon had made him realize something terrifying. How easily she could walk away from commitments when something better came along. If she could leave Landon after 3 years, what would stop her from doing the same to him eventually? Chrissy tried desperately to reassure him. She told him what they had was different, that she'd chosen him over everything else in her life because their connection was real and lasting. but Joel said he needed space to figure out his feelings, which was really just a nice way of saying he was leaving her to deal with the pregnancy alone. So there she was, 12 weeks pregnant, completely alone for the first time in years. She'd lost both of the men she loved because she'd tried to follow her heart instead of playing it safe. And everyone, her friends, her family, even acquaintances, they all acted like she'd gotten exactly what she deserved. Chrissy spent the next several months working through her pregnancy alone. Joel eventually reached out to say he wanted to be involved in the baby's life, but couldn't handle a romantic relationship with her anymore. Landon had already started seeing someone new, a woman from his work who seemed perfectly nice and uncomplicated. He wished Chrissy well, but made it clear he was moving on with his life. At 34 weeks, Chrissy got a call that Joel had been in a car accident. Despite everything, she still loved him and wanted to be there for him. When she got to the hospital, Joel told her something that shattered any remaining hope she'd been clinging to. While he'd been taking time to think about their relationship, he'd actually been seeing someone else. Someone from his work who didn't know anything about Chrissy or the pregnancy. 2 weeks later, Chrissy went into premature labor. Her daughter was born at 36 weeks, tiny but healthy, and Joel came to the hospital with his new girlfriend. Chrissy had to watch him introduce this other woman as his partner, while their daughter lay in the NICU fighting to breathe on her own. When Joel asked if he could bring his girlfriend to visit the baby in the NICU, Chrissy finally snapped. She told him absolutely not. He threatened to get lawyers involved if she tried to keep him from his daughter. Then came the final blow. 2 weeks after her daughter was born, Chrissy's employer called her in for a meeting. They wanted to discuss concerns about her work performance. What they really meant was that her messy personal life had become an embarrassment, and they wanted her gone. They offered her a severance package in exchange for her resignation. 6 months after her daughter was born, Chrissy had to move back in with her parents. She couldn't afford to live on her own anymore. At 27 years old, she was sleeping in her childhood bedroom with a baby. No job, no relationship, and no realistic plan for how to get back on her feet. The isolation was crushing. She'd gone from having multiple loving relationships and a full social life to being completely alone with a baby who depended on her for everything. Even her old friends had disappeared. A year after her daughter was born, Chrissy finally found a decent job and moved into a small apartment. Joel had mostly faded out of the picture by then. He'd see his daughter maybe once a month, send sporadic child support when he remembered. His relationship with his girlfriend had gotten serious. They were talking about getting married and having children of their own. And Landon? He'd gotten married and bought a house with his wife. Chrissy heard through mutual friends that they were trying for a baby and were incredibly happy together. Sometimes, late at night, Chrissy would think about what her life would have been like if she'd stayed with Landon. If she'd chosen comfortable stability over passionate intensity. Today, Chrissy's daughter is 2 years old, and despite everything, despite all the mistakes, all the pain, all the consequences, that little girl is the most amazing person Chrissy has ever known. When she looks at her daughter, she knows that whatever wrong turns she took along the way, her child was worth all of it. Chrissy still believes in love. She still believes in connection. But what she doesn't believe in anymore is the fairy tale that following your heart will always lead you to happiness. That being authentic and honest will protect you from devastating consequences. The truth is, Chrissy made choices. Some of those choices broke rules she'd agreed to. Some of those choices hurt people who loved her. And some of those choices had consequences she never could have imagined when she was 23 years old, reading articles about enlightened relationships and thinking she'd figured out how to have it all. Maybe she'll find love again someday. Maybe she won't. But whatever happens, she's living with the consequences of her decisions. And the people around her? They're living with those consequences too. So what's the lesson here? Is it that open relationships don't work? That polyamory is doomed to fail? That traditional monogamy is the only path to happiness? No. The lesson is much simpler than that. The lesson is that no relationship structure, whether it's monogamy, polyamory, or anything in between, can protect you from the consequences of breaking trust, of breaking your word, of making choices in the heat of the moment that have lifelong implications. Chrissy thought she was living authentically. But authenticity without integrity is just selfishness with better marketing. And that's something worth remembering. whatever kind of relationships you choose to build in your life. Thank you so much for listening to this story today. I know it was a heavy one, and I appreciate you staying with me through all of it. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, if it challenged you in any way, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and it lets me know what kind of content resonates with you. And please share this video with your friends. These are the kinds of stories we need to be having real conversations about, not to judge, but to understand the complexity of human choices and consequences. Most importantly, if you haven't already, subscribe to Mrs. Emma. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Every week, I bring you real stories from real people, stories about love, loss, choices, and consequences. Stories that make us think about our own lives and the decisions we make every single day. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about Chrissy's story. Was she wrong? Was she just following her heart? Could things have turned out differently if she'd made different choices? I want to hear your perspective. Until next time, this is Emma reminding you that every choice we make creates ripples we can't always see. Choose wisely. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.